All right, everyone, we've got some more bug news today. As a reminder, please like and subscribe and share. It really helps the channel out, helps me get going, trying to attract more people here. From the LA Times, we have the grasshopper apocalypse, why these farmers are bracing for an insect invasion. So to summarize this up, out west, they're seeing an explosion in the grasshopper populations and the Mormon cricket populations. This, although terrible, especially for the farmers, especially cattle farmers, this is not a new phenomenon, but it is a very concerning phenomenon. So for those of you who don't know a lot about cattle farming, in the western United States, a lot of the open rangeland, especially federal rangeland, is leased over to cattle farmers for grazing. And this is pretty much in all western states, and this is how, I wouldn't say the majority, but a lot of cattle, or especially like grass-fed cattle, are produced in the United States. Unfortunately, for a lot of that rangeland, it is infested with grasshoppers every year. Now, this isn't necessarily an issue all years, but especially when there are a series of drought years, which are very common out west, you can see an explosion in the grasshopper populations. This is largely because the drought sort of suppresses a lot of the fungus that kills grasshoppers and a lot of the other natural predators. So the grasshopper populations, which normally breed in soil, grasshoppers lay their eggs underground for the most part, don't end up getting affected by these fungi and other natural enemies. And then you end up with, especially if you have year after year drought, you end up with a population that's constantly building up on itself until you end up with these sort of biblical swarms of locusts. Now, like I said, this is not new. For those of you who are unaware, this is a recurrent issue out west. Historically, the United States has huge issues with grasshopper populations. And there are programs in place through the federal government and some through local governments that are solely just for the suppression of grasshoppers and Mormon crickets. For both, the general control mechanism are aerial sprays of pesticides, usually over federal land, and then private landowners are kind of encouraged to do the same, but frequently they don't want to have to pay for it. So you can end up with kind of sparse control where some lands are sprayed and some aren't, but because Mormon crickets and grasshoppers move around so much, if you have a problem this year, maybe those grasshoppers will be, several counties over by the end of the year or by next year. Historically, it's been much worse than it is now. And the article goes into this a little bit. 50 years ago, some counties disbanded this program just because the grasshoppers seem to be under some state of permanent control. Clearly, that is not the case. But the cycles of these grasshopper and cricket infestations can be very long. You can have outbreaks that last decades, and then they can kind of disappear for decades. So when you do get big swarms of this, they tend to eat everything. They eat all of the rangeland, which prevents cattle farmers from grazing that land. So cattle prices end up going up quite a bit. And on top of that, they're also a huge road hazard, especially Mormon crickets because they don't fly. But grasshoppers which fly can obviously, if you're trapped in a swarm of it, they'll be bombarding your car. But for Mormon crickets, which are just as dangerous but can't fly, you end up with these sort of quick-moving carpets of insects where you'll have millions of insects like get onto a highway at once. And if you're driving at a high speed and you run into that, the highways become extremely slick with the fat and the guts and the fluids from the Mormon crickets and the grasshoppers that are on the road. And in years where there's massive infestations of these grasshoppers and crickets, you end up with a lot of accidents on mountain roads or very tight, twisty, turny roads because cars and trucks will just slide off of the road because these pulverized insects basically produce a grease film on the roads. and it is very, very dangerous. Hopefully, this infestation doesn't last more than a year or two, but this will likely result in the federal government doing more aerial pesticide sprays out west and a lot more application of pesticides out west, and maybe an increase in irrigation. Generally speaking, grasshoppers avoid irrigated and wet fields, although when the population is really, really high, they will move into irrigated fields because that moisture tends to facilitate the spread of fungi really, really well. And fungi are the primary pathogens of insects. So keep an eye on this if you are interested in beef prices, but this will almost certainly increase beef prices over the next couple of years just because the United States won't be able to produce as much beef on these infested lands. But that's it for the bug news today, and I'll see you guys later. Thanks.